The history of the development of halakha. We went sort of briefly through the Torah Shebaal Peh, which is we start with Midrash Halakha, Mishnah, Talmud, and the Geonic period, and Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi. We spoke about the Rif. Hopefully, we'll have a session on the studying actually the Rif from the way it is printed, the way it is. It appears at the end of the Gemara. Maybe we'll do it keseder, at least one tractate. But now I'm going to go to the next stage, sort of the of what we have in the history of halacha, and that is the time of Maimonides. What Rambam did is his major work, which is the Mishneh Torah. He was the first one to reorganize all the material in a thematic manner. Remember that we spoke about how this process is sort of cyclical. It goes in waves. First, you have the text, you have the interpretation, you have halachot or conclusions that are scattered over many different works and fields, and you want to gather them and organize them in a thematic way. And then again, once you write an interpretation on that material, it starts spreading out again, and you have to. So every couple of hundred of years or more, depends on the process. You will have to put all this material together and reorganize it. So up until Maimonides, what we have in terms of halakha, we have besides, I'm talking about post-Talmudic, we have the work of Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, who basically took the Talmud, he took the Gemara, and he cleaned out all the non-relevant material. And we have a lot of single books that were written on specific topics. They are called, professionally called monographs, because it's a book that is written about one topic. Usually, those are some laws. Usually, it was the financial laws that were the most important laws. So we have the laws of Yerushot, Nahalot, inheritance, wills, shtarot, documents. There are also books that were written about brachot, about prayers, but they were all monographs. Each one of them was dedicated to one subject. There were also the books that were minyan mitzvot. There were scholars who counted the mitzvot and organized them and wrote commentary on them. Rambam was the first one to have this comprehensive view that really come from a scientific mindset. I always say that it's important to study Rambam, even just to get the feel of his approach, of how you approach everything systematically. So he came to the conclusion that the way the halachic material is transmitted is cumbersome, because every author, each and every author who would write a halachic work, would reference all the authors that wrote about the subject before him, and so this one said in the name of this one and this one and that one, and then it would go on, sometimes with dozens of names in a single page. And he said from the beginning he had a vision of the final product, and we'll see he writes about this in his introduction. And for that final product, he envisioned a work that will be divided into books, that each book will contain several sub themes. So, for example, in the book of Zemanim, which is the book of times, he will have Shabbat, Pesach, which he called Hametz Umatzah, the laws of Sukkot, etc. So that will be the framework. He decided that each book will be divided into sub themes, will be divided into a perek and halacha, the way the Mishnah is written. He decided it will be written in the language of the Mishnah because it's the most suitable to deliver that the halachic material that is available. But he said that in order to write these halachot, he would like to tie them to their source in the Torah. So at the beginning of each theme, each subject, he will place the number of the mitzvot as they appear in the Torah, and then he will elaborate on the halachot. So he said, in order to do that, I will have to count the mitzvot. And in order to count the mitzvot, I will have to create a system that will allow me to determine which mitzvah makes it in, which mitzvah remains outside, because that there was a long debate between the different mitzvot counters, the different scholars who wrote on the mitzvot. So that is how he approached the work. First, he wrote the rules by which you determine whether a certain concept in the Torah is a mitzvah that is counted within the 613 mitzvot. Then he listed all the mitzvot. Then he broke them down into the different themes, different subjects that they are related to. And then he placed at the beginning of each subject the number of mitzvot that are related to the subject. So, for example, at the introduction to Hilchot Shabbat, he says there are 5 mitzvot in the Torah that speak about Shabbat, and he lists them, and then he goes on to explain Hilchot Shabbat. So when he writes his halachot, unlike the authors before him that usually adhered to the order of the Talmud, to the pages of the Talmud, he reorganizes the material in his own way, in his own system. The ultimate goal that the Rambam had in mind was, as you well know, that there will be no other book to be used other than the Torah and the Mishneh Torah. He wanted people to transition immediately from the Torah to his Mishneh Torah without the need to look up any other book in between. And of course, as when he published his book, on one hand, it became extremely popular. It spread the greatest number of manuscripts that we have in the National Library in Yerushalayim is of copies of Maimonides, Mishneh Torah. But it was also attacked immediately by many rabbis who felt that he is threatening the traditional establishment, the study of the Talmud, and also the ability to argue with a decisor of halakha. They felt that by writing the halachot the way he did, which not only he gave only one option of halakha, this is the halakha, this is what we do, and no other options. He also did not provide his sources, so you couldn't argue with him. The question is, why did he not do that? Why did he not provide his sources? And another important question to ask is whether Rambam Maimonides succeeded in his mission to have his book as a book of halakha that would be followed by all. We'll see. We'll get to this later when we talk about the period of the Rishonim. But I personally believe that though the work is amazing and it is really a work that's hard to imagine how it was done by one person alone. The goal that the Rambam set for himself has not been achieved, because the book did become popular. It was studied for a while. People followed the laws as they were written in certain places, not in all places, not in all communities. People followed the halachot, but it was quickly replaced by the Tur in the Ashkenazi communities, then by the Shulchan Aruch, and then by the commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch. And even though today in the yeshivot the Rambam and the Talmud are studied side by side, it's more for the pure intellectual joy of trying to reconcile the two books that don't always agree with each other, than in order to follow the laws as Maimonides has determined them. So the the question is, once we determine that, why wasn't it successful? Why did people not accept the Mishneh Torah as a book of halakha the way Rambam intended for it to be? And I think that one of the reasons, it's not the only reason, but one of the reasons is that Rambam did not allow for wiggle room or for flexibility or acceptance of different minhagim. It did not take into account maybe the diversity of mankind and the fact that communities in different places would like to follow their own traditions that have developed. And when he said this is how we do it, it created friction and rejection, and eventually people withdrew away from the book. So, with that, let us look into his introduction. And when we go to study certain halachot with their historical development, we'll dig more into in-depth into the way he wrote the halakha. One more thing that I add, Rambam, there's a famous story about Rambam. There's a letter, actually. He received a letter from a Dayan, a judge in Egypt, Rabbi Pinhas, who asked him about the source of a certain halakha that is written in the Mishneh Torah, and he wanted to know where from did Maimonides derive that law. And Rambam answers, he says, when I got your letter, Amadati mishtomem kesha'ahar, I was perplexed. I couldn't really put my finger on the source of this halakha. So some people say there's an admittance that he should have written the source of the halachot. But I think that the reason or the decision not to write the source of the halakha was not just in order not to make the book cumbersome and difficult to use, but rather to cut once and for all the halachic debate. Meaning that if we come with this approach to Maimonides, we have to accept the possibility that sometimes he made maybe an arbitrary decision, that in front of him there were parallel sources or multiple sources, and there was no solid basis to decide the halakha according to one or according to the other, or maybe that he even added certain concepts and ideas of his own without letting the reader know that this is his own addition to the body of the text of the halakha, and that is an important thing to know, because when we go back and analyze the halachot of Rambam, there will be those who say, even though we cannot find the source, we have to assume that there was a source in front of him, and this is not always the case. And in our discussion of the laws of modesty on Hoshana Rabbah, I didn't get there yet to the text of Rambam, but definitely this is a good example when he discusses the hair covering for women, and he speaks about the different types of hair covering. It seems that he relies on the Mishnah in Ketubot, but in reality, it's his own interpretation in his commentary of the Mishnah that he incorporated into this halakha as if it was part of the Talmudic discussion. So with that, I'm going to switch to the text of Maimonides. 1 second. Okay, so you see the text in front of you? That's the introduction to Mishneh Torah.
I see it.
Okay, so the introduction to Mishneh Torah, Rambam writes this. I'm going to read the text and explain. אז לא אבוש בהביתי את כל מצוותיך, כל המצוות שניתנו לו למשה בסיני בפירושן ניתנו. All the commandments, all the precepts that were given to Moshe on Sinai were given with their with the details. Perushan is not interpretation, as it's translated here, but rather the expansion or the detailed description of the law. More from the word lifros, to open up. Beferushan nitnu, and he explains, Ve'etna lecha et luchot ha'even v'torah v'mitzvah. Hashem says, I will give you the Torah and the mitzvah. Torah is the Torah shebichtav, mitzvah is the perusha. In this it follows the midrashic interpretation. The Torah is the written law. Mitzvah is the commentary on the written law, but more than commentary, the way Rambam sees it, those are the details, the actual details of the oral laws. V'tzivanu la'asot Torah al pi mitzvah, and Hashem commanded us to do the Torah according to mitzvah. He goes on to say that Moshe wrote the whole Torah in his handwriting, and he gave one scroll to each tribe, and one scroll he put in the ark. That's also based on midrashic interpretation. But the oral law he did not write, but rather he passed it on to the elders, to Yoshua, and to the rest of the people. And he goes through the process of how he taught Moshe, how Moshe taught it to Elazar, Pinchas, Yoshua, which all this, by the way, is we could say is part of the midrashic interpretation of the transmission of the law, because when we look in the Torah, other than the moment in chapter 11 in the Bamidbar, when Moshe bestows his spirit or his prophecy upon the 70 elders, they don't appear again. We don't have in the Torah a description of a teaching process between Moshe and the 70 elders, but we assume that there was some kind of an oral tradition that was passed, but not necessarily in that exact by that exact order. Uzkenim rabim kiblu miYoshua v'kibel Ali min azkenim uPinchas. The elders received the oral law from Joshua. Eli, or Eli, the high priest of Shiloh, received it from the elders, from Pinchas. Shmuel learned from Eli. David from Shmuel. Ahiya Shiloni from Moshe, and he learned from David. And all that is based, not all that, I mean parts of that are based on Midrash. You have to realize when we say Shmuel uBedino, Shmuel and his court, where is the court of Shmuel mentioned in the Navi? It is not mentioned. According to the book of Shmuel, Shmuel operates as a prophet with his own authority that is guided directly by God. The idea that Shmuel operates with the Bedin is influenced by later interpretation in the Talmud, which says that Lo Bashamayim, the Torah is not in heaven. So a prophet cannot really argue with a scholar. So we have to view Shmuel as a scholar, as a sage of the Torah. So this discussion in Maimonides of the transmission from Eliyahu to Elisha to Yehoyada, the Kohen, the priest, to Zechariah, Bedino, Hosea, Zechariah, Amos, etc., is a little. Some of it is based on the genealogy as we find in the Tanakh, but the idea of Bedin is not really there. Especially when we look, for example, Yehoyada, Ubedino, the Yehoyada, the Kohen, was, if he refers to Yehoyada who found the Sefer Torah, then how does he have a Bedin when there is no knowledge of the Torah itself? So those are the problems that we have with this description of the transmission of the oral law. Not to say that there was no transmission of the oral law, but rather that the way it is described is not necessarily accurate or based on hard data that we have, because we don't have anywhere in the Tanakh or in any other sources a reference to all those batei dinim, to the what we assume would have been hundreds of elders, of sages in each and every generation. We have no names, we have no record of them in the Torah, in the Tanakh. So that's just good to keep in mind. We're not questioning the idea of the transmission of the oral law, just in the way it is described here. בית דינו של עזרא, in paragraph 7 here, הם הנקראים אנשי כנסת הגדולה. The court of Ezra is called the men of the great assembly, and they are Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah, Nehemiah ben Hachaliah, Mordechai, Zerubbabel. So we have all these names that what they have in common is that they are all mentioned as people who were active toward the end of the exile from Babel, the destruction of the first temple and the construction of the second temple. But the problem, again, from a historical point of view, the problem with that description of viewing or imagining a court headed by Ezra, where all these people sit together, is that we find no interaction in the Bible between Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi as three prophets. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah are a group of four people, but we don't find them interacting with all the others. Nehemiah interacted with Ezra, but we have no connection between them and Mordechai. And the same with the Zerubbabel, which was the first Peha, the first prince appointed by the Persian kings, but then was replaced by Nehemiah. So, again, this is the problem with the details here. But the more we advance to our period, the more accurate the descriptions becomes. There in paragraph 8, he goes on to describe the transmission in the Mishnaic times. If he describes Antignos Ish Socho, who received from Shimon HaTzadik, Shimon HaTzadik is described in rabbinic sources as someone who met with Alexander the Great. So he would be living in the 3rd century before the Common Era. And from here, from Shimon HaTzadik to Hillel, we get to about 200 years, 250 years of transmission. Just interesting to note here that Rambam emphasizes the point that Hillel and that Shmaya and Avtalon were converts. Shmaya and Avtalon Girat Tzedek, and he does the same when he talks later on about Rabbi Akiva. Says Rabbi Akiva ben Yosef kibel mi Rabbi Eliezer Gadol v'Yosef aviv ger tzedek haya. He says the father of Rabbi Akiva was a convert, even though this is not corroborated by the sources. There's no evidence that Rabbi Akiva, if he was Ben Gerim, that his father was a convert. Rabbi Meir, he also emphasizes Ben Ger Tzedek. This is accurate information that we find in the Talmud, in the Mishnah, and here he counts all the. I'm not going to go into this whole list. The Rabbi Meir. I'm going to get to paragraph 12 when he speaks about Rabbeinu HaKadosh, because here he comes to talk about the writing of the Mishnah. Rabbeinu HaKadosh חיבר המשנה, ומימות משה ועד רבנו הקדוש לא חיבור שמלמדים אותו ברבים בתורה שבעל פה. אלא בכל דור ודור, ראש בדין או נביא שיהיה באותו הדור, כותב לעצמו זיכרון השמועות ששמע מרבותיו, והוא מלמד על פה ברבים. So it says Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, or it's called Rabbeinu HaKadosh, composed the Mishnah. So here it says compiled, maybe more accurate, lehaber, in terms of putting together, because as we saw with our brief survey of the Mishnah is not edited by one person, but rather is put together by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi of many pre-existing files that came from different schools that wrote about similar topics, and it's put together apparently seamlessly, but when we analyze it thoroughly, we can find the same lines within the specific tractates. But he says that Rambam says here that there was never a written document that was taught publicly and dealt with the oral law. Rambam is very careful here with the choice of his words. It doesn't say that nothing was written. It says nothing was written and taught publicly. Meaning, and that is the next part where he says, in each and every generation, the head of the Bedin or the prophet would write for himself a sort of in bullet points what he have learned from his teachers, and he teaches it orally to the community. That again is the way it's described, at least up until the period of coming back from Zion, or maybe the Greek invasion in the 3rd century. We don't have much information to back up this argument. And in the Semikha podcast, there are 14 episodes discussing the place of halakha as we know it today in the Tanakh. It's recommended to listen to it and to have this in mind. And he says also, "V'chen kol echad v'echad kotev le'atzmo kefi kocho מביאור התורה ומהלכותיה כמו ששמע ומדברים שנתחדשו בכל דור ודור." Each student would write for himself certain things the way he has heard from others and from the things that were have evolved in each and every generation. בדינים שלא למדו מפי השמועה אלא במידה מ13 מידות והסכימו עליהם בדין הגדול. וכן היה הדבר תמיד עד רבנו הקדוש. This is an important statement that Rambam makes. Remember our discussion of the 13 methods of interpretation of the Torah, which include the Kal Vachomer, a fortiori, Gezerah Shava, comparing two words, Binyan Av, one subject that breaks into separate subjects. Rambam says that some of these laws that were derived by those methods were not part of the oral tradition, but rather it was a haskama of the Bedin HaGadol. It was a vote. The law was brought to discussion, and they voted to follow a certain opinion, the way they interpreted the Torah. But what Rabbeinu HaKadosh did, הוא קיבץ כל השמועות וכל הדינים וכל הפירורים וכל הפירושים ששמעו משה רבנו ושלימדו בדין שלכל דור ודור בכל התורה כולה. רבי יהודה הנשיא gathered all the laws that were transmitted orally and were taught in each and every generation, and put it all together into the book of the Mishnah, and he taught it publicly, and it was revealed to the whole nation, and they all wrote it down, and they taught it everywhere, so the oral law would not be forgotten from the people. So that is something that has to be really analyzed, to ask, do we really have in the Mishnah all the oral tradition, everything that has been taught in each and every generation? If we compare the amount of material that we have every 100 years within the rabbinical world, and we ask, how is it possible that from the time of the last written books of Halakha, Yoshua, Shoftim, and on, we don't have that much halachic material? Why don't we have all these discussions? There are very few verses in the Bible that deal with halakha. Where is all this material? That's one question. The other one is, if we look into the Midrash Agadah, the rabbis say that there were hundreds or thousands of volumes of material that have been lost between the previous generations and the author and the composition of the Mishnah. But we'll put all these questions we'll put aside, because that is for when we go into the halachic process of trying to determine halakha, we should really research the source of every halakha from the Torah to Midrash, halakha to Mishnah. We're just now presenting the difficulties with understanding that chain of transmission as Rambam describes it. he says, "Velama asa Rabbeinu Hakadosh kach, velo haniach hadavar kemot shaya." Why did he do that? Lefi shera'a, I mean, what brought him to the decision of writing the Mishnah? Lefi shera'a שהתלמידים מתמעטים והולכים, והצרות מתחדשות ובאות. וממלכת הרשעה פושטת בעולם ומתגברת, וישראל מתגלגלים והולכים לקצוות. Because he saw that there are few students and great disasters, calamities were continually happening. The wicked government, which is Rome, is spreading its net over the whole world, and Am Yisrael is dispersed. So he decided to write it down so people will not forget it. And all his life, he taught the Mishnah publicly. Now, we'll see later on that this argument that Rambam attributes to Rabbeinu Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and it's really already written in the Talmud, would be used by Maimonides himself to explain why he wrote the Mishneh Torah, and it will be used again by Rabbi Yaakov ben Rabbeinu Asher when he writes the Arba'a Turim, by Rabbi Yosef Karo when he writes the Shulchan Aruch, by the Hafetz Haim, Rabbi Israel Meir Cohen of Radin when he writes the Mishnah Berurah, and by Haim Ovadia Yosef when he writes the Yabia Omer or Yalkut Yosef, and just mentioning just a few scholars. So at any given time, someone would say, I must write down the material because the people of today, our generation, is not capable of comprehending halakha and encompassing all the material. And we must wonder whether this is true or whether this is a pretext for writing the halakha, which is fine if one needs to write the halakha and it's beneficial for the community, it's fine. The question is whether it is true that halakha was forgotten, because there could be another argument when we talk about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and the composition of the Mishnah that it was meant to solidify one uniform halakha for all. That was, and we see that as a trend within the family of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, which was of Davidic dynasty. We see it with Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. There are different stories in the Talmud that show that they acted in a certain way as dictators. We could say beneficent dictators, because they did it for the well-being of the people, and that was really the intention. They wanted to have one halakha for all, so there would be no more disputes. And Rabban Gamliel, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel are recorded as saying in certain disputes that they had, the famous Tanu Rosh Arachnai and others, they say, Lo lema'ani lo lichvodi velo lichvod bet Abba asiti. I'm not doing that for my honor or for the honor of my family. I'm doing it shelo yirbu mahlokot b'Yisrael, in order to prevent disputes. And that is interesting because the Rabban Gamliel dynasty is part of the Hillel school, and at the early stages, it was Bet Shammai who imposed their halakha on Bet Hillel. The famous 18 decrees that are mentioned on Shabbat, Elu mishmona asar davar shegazru ba'aliyat Hananiah ben Hizkiah ben Gurion. There was a case where the students of Bet Shammai and students of Bet Hillel were in the same place, and they had a debate. And when the students of Shammai realized that they are the majority, they placed guards at the door and they voted on the halachot and they decided it. And it was a violent confrontation. People were killed. The students of Hillel who tried to get in were killed in order to make the vote pass. So it makes sense that later on, when the Hillel Davidic dynasty took over, that they would make sure that they establish their rule and they sort of abolish the halakha of Bet Shammai. The next paragraph in Maimonides also sheds light on that problem, But he says those are the great rabbis who were in the court of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi and received from him Shimon and Gamliel, his children, Rabbi Afes, he names them. Those are the people that we have to look at. The Rav and Shmuel. Rav is the first of the Amoraim who migrated to Babylonia. Shmuel was born in Bavel. But here, Rabbi Hiya and Rabbi Yoshaya are two names that we have to look at, because Rabbi Hiya and Rabbi Yoshaya are, as well as far as we know, are the authors of the Tosefta. So, in that description, we have sort of this harmonious relationships between Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rabbi Hiya, Rabbi Yoshaya. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi writes the Mishnah. Rabbi Hiya, as he writes here later on in paragraph 18, Rabbi Hiya חיבר התוספתא, Rabbi Yoshaya בר כפרה חיברו ברייתות לבאר דברי המשנה. That those three sages, Rabbi Hiya, Rabbi Yoshaya, and Bar Kapara, wrote the Baraitot. Baraitot comes from the Aramaic word for out, bar or bara. So they're external Mishnayot. And the way the Rambam describes it, they came to explain the Mishnah. But the way we understand it today, modern scholarship, and which is based on a very meticulous comparison of the words of the Tosefta, of the external Mishnah, to the Mishnah that was published by Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, shows that this is not the case. Most probably what happened was that when Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote his file, called the Mishnah, other sages, Rabbi Hiya, Rabbi Yoshaya, each one with his own following, with his own school, also tried to do the same thing. But because Rabbi Yehuda was had more power and it was of a more prestigious position, his system or his compilation prevailed. So the description of Rabbi Hiya, Rabbi Yoshaya, Bar Kapara, all these people as part of the court of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, and the writing of the other text as shedding light on the Mishnah is problematic. This also, in paragraph 18, Rav חיבר ספרה וספרי לבאר ולהודיע עיקרי המשנה, that the Sifra and the Sifra is the Midrash Halacha on Vayikra. Sifrei is Midrash Halacha on Bamidbar and Dvarim. And according to Maimonides, it comes to explain the essence or the roots of the laws that are written in the Mishnah. But as we studied earlier, and this is really the logical process, the Midrash Halacha developed before the Mishnah. So if we want to accept the words of Rambam here, we'll have to say that what he meant is that Rav put together the Sifra and the Sifrei that were already pre-existing material that actually was the origin for the Mishnah. He just put it together in that way. The argument against it, and the strongest argument against it, would be that the correlation between the Sifra and Sifrei and the Mishnah is not that clear. Sifra and Sifrei are clearly built on the text of the Torah. The Mishnah delivers a clear-cut final halacha without using all the arguments and the discussions in the Sifra and Sifrei, and it's the Talmud that pulls them in when it needs to find a source or to analyze certain halacha.
I mean, what would you think is obviously the Rambam thinks that one systemized halachas is probably ideal, but do you think that's also the Gemara, at least the Bavli, saying that the ideal is that we have these machloket until some
right? It's a good question. I think that there were definitely. I think that at every step or every period, there were people who thought. There were people who belonged to one school and people who belonged to the other school. Some people believed in the uniformity of halakha, and other people believed in letting people do what they need to do. Like the example that we looked at Masechet Brachot, that you have the rabbis who say you have to pray 18 brachot a day, and Rabbi Eliezer says no, you pray your own personal prayer. And that was also part of the fear of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. He anticipated a possibility where people will try to impose the halacha on all, and that I think is real fear of writing the Mishnah, because once you write it down, it's the only thing that you could follow. But if we look at a much more at a much broader historical perspective, I think that what we'll see is this: the Mishnah Torah of Maimonides eventually was not widely accepted by all. We're not following the Mishnah Torah today. People look it up for intellectual purposes, but very few people, except for those I know, a group who identifies as a Maimonidean, very few people live their life halachically by the Mishnah Torah. On the other hand, a lot of people think that they live by the Shulchan Aruch. And I say think because nobody really lives according to the Shulchan Aruch. Even the most observant in all different communities, as Sephardim, Ashkenazim, no matter what, nobody lives by the Shulchan Aruch. But everybody refers to the Shulchan Aruch as the book of halacha. You know, this is the equivalent to what in English people say the Bible of, right? The Internet Bible, the shopping Bible, etc. In the frum world, will be like, this is my Shulchan Aruch, right? Even when you talk about cooking, they will say this is my Shulchan Aruch of cooking. Became the synonym for a book. Yeah, Nadav, 1 second. It's a book of that everybody follows, and I think the reason for that was that Rambam, and I said it several times, several classes, Rambam did not allow for flexibility. There's only one halacha, and everybody must follow it, and it doesn't work with human nature. What Rabbi Yosef Karo did, on the other hand, and that's explained in my podcast on Rabbi Yosef Karo and the Shulchan Aruch. What Rabbi Yosef Karo did was he left a lot of halachot open-ended. He first of all wrote the commentary Bet Yosef on the tool, and in his final work Bet Yosef Shulchan Aruch, he not always agreed with what he wrote in Bet Yosef, so already he created some kind of an inner dispute. And even when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch, he would write, that's the halacha, v'yesh omrim. And some say this. And in some places we have 3 halachot in one place. For example, when he speaks about women at a funeral, he says, Makom shenagu, if the custom was to go for the women to walk before the coffin, that's what they should do. If they go behind the coffin, that's what they should do. But then he said, but achshav lo nagu ela har ha'aron, but now the custom is only after the coffin, but he says that they should not go at all. So we have 3 options. So what happens to the person, like, or the community in the field, is that if women walk before the coffin, they could find a support in the Shulchan Aruch. If they walk behind the coffin, they could find support in Shulchan Aruch. If they don't go at all, they could find support in Shulchan Aruch. So in a way, he allowed for communities to do a lot of things their way and still feel that they follow Shulchan Aruch. Nadav, you want to ask something? Nadav?
Yeah, so basically then what we're... Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
How Rambam formulated the halachot going down to the Shulchan Aruch, this whole concept then that we've all been taught of following the rove. You know, we have this cloud that, you know, we go according to the majority, but I don't, in terms of looking at the Mishnah Torah, it's very, very hard to see where Rambam himself did that. I mean, we can say that about the Shulchan Aruch, where, you know, he took 2 out of 3, but even then, that whole idea of taking 2 out of 3 is very, very sketchy because we don't find such a concept.
Right.
Other than just going with the majority. But it seems like, on the one hand, Rambam didn't go with the majority, or maybe we don't really know because he didn't give the sources. But then at the same time, Rav Yosef Karo and the Shulchan Aruch didn't really go by the quote majority because he took 2 out of 3 Rishonim. Right.
So that is a very complicated subject. The idea of majority, we'll have to get into it, you know, in the future. But first of all, you're right about the Rambam. Rambam doesn't show us that he is following majority. It doesn't show us what is the process, who is discussing the halacha and what are the different opinions, and who is he debating the halacha with. When we get to the Shulchan Aruch, we'll see that rule itself of taking 2 out of 3 between Rabbi Yitzhak Alfasi, Rabbeinu Yaakov Baal Turim, and Rabbeinu Asher, Rambam and Rabbeinu Asher, is also questionable. Rabbi Hacham David Shlush wrote a long discussion of that in his Hemdag Nuza in the first volume, and I discussed it also in my podcast on Rabbi Yosef Karo. In all these cases, what we see is really scholars. It's Maimonides, it's Rabbi Yosef Karo, the Mishnah Berurah, Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, and others, who at a certain point feel that the current situation is unhealthy. People do whatever they want, or because one synagogue does this, the other one does that. There are different levels of kashrut, and it's not good. It's better for everybody to be on the same page. What happens though, that when you put everybody on the same page, usually you push everybody to the extreme. So I'm moving ahead in time. I'll give you an example of what has happened today with the kosher meat industry, where everything is Glat or Bet Yosef, and even there, people would, in each Hasidic group or other movement has its own shechita, whereas in the past, you had in some places. This is what Rabbi Yosef Misas writes in his Otzara Michtavim. He says that when they were traveled in Morocco from city to city, even though they knew that each city has its own practices and regulations, they will eat the meat wherever they went. Meaning, they accepted this diversity. If this rabbi says it's kosher according to his ruling, that's fine with me, and we don't have to all be on the same page. Maybe we need to do that when we are in one synagogue. But even that is possible. In a synagogue, again, we're starting moving ahead in time, but this, I think, something that we have to bring back, because that is how it was in ancient times. And I had a synagogue in Israel where it was just the only Sephardic Zionist synagogue of the neighborhood, and each person came with a different custom. And at one point, people said, "So what is the custom of the Bet Knesset? What is the minhag?" I said, "There are certain things that we would agree on, but in terms of text of the tefillah, or things that are valid in different communities, whatever the Hazan of the day does is acceptable." I mean, if he would ask me beforehand, I'm the rabbi of the synagogue, I say, "This is what we should do." Fine. If he didn't ask and he did that, and there is a minhag like that, that's fine. We're good with that. And I think this is something that we have to bring back, to bring back the diversity and look at different possibilities in halacha. If it existed at a certain point in time, or if arguments for a similar case were done in the past and they're valid, we could apply it to our case. This is what I think we should do. So fine. So I'm going to go back to the text of Mishnah Torah of the introduction. We didn't even get yet to how Maimonides describes his own process. Maybe we'll have a chance to do it today. If not, we'll do it next time. So here in paragraph 22, the way it's divided here in Sefaria, he says, "Is kol elu hachemon izkarim hem gedolei adorot." All these sages are the great men of all these generations. Mehem rashei yeshivot, mehem rashei galuyot, mehem misanedrei gdola. Some of them were the heads of the yeshivot. Some of them were the heads of the galuyot, of the exiles, the different communities. Some of them were members of the great assembly, and with them, with every generation, there were thousands and hundreds or tens of thousands who learned from them and with them. All this also is not supported by historical tradition. Even when we talk about the rabbis at the time of the Talmud, Rav Ashi, Ravina, Rava, we might say that there were thousands of people who gathered twice a year for a special session that was directed for the masses. But we don't know of yeshivot that held thousands, or definitely not tens of thousands of people. The whole Jewish population in some places were tens of thousands of people, and they were working people. So there's another sort of flaw in the historical discussion that, and we put aside for now. Paragraph 23. Ravina ורבשי סוף חכמי התלמוד, ורבשי הוא שחיבר התלמוד הבבלי בארץ שנער, אחר שחיבר רבי יוחנן התלמוד הירושלמי בכמו 100 שנה. Says Ravina and Ravashei are the last sages of the Talmud. This is the traditional view. We spoke about that. That the traditional view is that Ravina and Ravashei edited the Talmud Bavli and gave it its final shape. And that is based on a statement in the Talmud that says that Ravina and Ravashei did Mahadura Kama and Mahadura Batra. They did sort of an edition of the Talmud. But what it really means, that statement means that Mahadura is a cycle, that they taught their students the whole body of Talmud from beginning to end, once or twice. And we just touched on it in our previous discussion, but the Savoraim or the Stamaim, those anonymous rabbis who worked for maybe 150 or 200 years between the end of the official end of the Talmudic period and the beginning of the Gaonic period, added a lot of material into the Babylonian Talmud. That is the time that of Ravina and Ravashei is about the middle of the 5th century, 450, or 550, and it attributed to Rabbi Yochanan the Talmud Yerushalmi about 100 years earlier. Now, what happened with the Talmud Yerushalmi is that because the Roman Empire became Christian, officially Christian, it persecuted the Jews of Eretz Israel, limited their activity. In the 4th century, the end of the 4th century, beginning of the 5th century, it outlawed the presidency, Mossad HaNesiut. There was no more Nasi, and it was hard to establish a learning tradition in Eretz Israel. They still had it, and they had many halachot that differed than the way that the Babylonians interpreted them, and part of it had to do with their closer relationship with the Mishnah. But what happened, unfortunately, to the Talmud Bavli, the Talmud Yerushalmi, is that around the 7th, 8th century, there was a campaign of the Babylonian yeshivot against it. They downplayed the Talmud Yerushalmi as a Torah Shmad, Torah that was studied under persecution and therefore was not able to develop. And because the campaign succeeded, people accepted the label that the rabbis, the Babylonian rabbis, put on the Talmud Yerushalmi, so they stopped learning it, or they looked at it less. And as a result, the oral tradition of how to interpret the Talmud has diminished, and it became more and more complicated to understand. Eventually, it became sort of the Sefer HaTum, a sealed book that no one would be able to approach. And we'll talk next time, in the next session, about how Rambam understands the Talmud. I'll just mention here, it's an important detail, that one of the early books that Maimonides wrote before he wrote the Mishneh Torah is a book called Kitzur Ilchot Yerushalmi, the summary of the laws of the Talmud Yerushalmi. And we only know of the existence of this book through the Geniza. Only remnants of it were found in the Cairo Geniza. There are fragments of the book, and that might be an explanation for the rulings of Maimonides in his Mishneh Torah. He might have adopted in certain places the approach of the Talmud Yerushalmi versus the Talmud Bavli, but as I said, we don't have the actual book in front of us. It's hard to determine that, and we have to always think of how did Rambam understand the sugya in the Bavli, in the Yerushalmi. We do know from several sources that maybe following the methodology of the Rif, who was his master's master in like 6 generations earlier, that the irrelevant material in the sugya should be moved aside, and if the Talmud interprets the Mishnah in a very narrow way, Rambam not necessarily will accept this interpretation. But we'll conclude here for today, and we'll continue next week, God willing, same time. That will be the time, Tuesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, with the paragraph 24 here, and the explanation of the Talmud.